Now, this is something that I have studied in the context of what I call psychological targeting, which is really this ability of algorithms to take your data, translate it into something and that is meaningful on a psychological level. And I'm going to give you a few examples in a second, and then take insights into your psychology. Again, your motivations, preferences, desires, and so on, to influence the choices that you make and the way that you behave and show up in the world. And for some of the more technical nerds in this room, you can think of it as like reading and writing, right? So oftentimes files have permissions of you can read a file, but then the next one is you can also write into the file. I think of this as reading from the mind. So we take data to get a peek, get an insight into what's going on within our minds, but then also writing into the mind in the sense that we're changing what's going on inside our minds and how we think about the world. I want to start with this question of how can we actually take someone's, what I call digital footprints, translate them into something that is more psychological meaningful. Now, a lot of this is powered by machine learning, it's powered by AI. If anyone in this room is excited about this, I'm happy to talk about it offline, so I'm not going to go into any of the technical details, but I want to give you a couple of examples from some of my own work, some of the work of my colleagues, that I think really nicely highlight how it's not rocket science to take someone's digital footprints, the behavior that they exhibit online, and then translate it into something that is more psychologically meaningful. So let me start here. So this was actually some of the first research that was done in this space, where some of my colleagues looked at the words in people's social media posts. So think of it as like the stories that you tell about yourself, the stories that you tell about what you've done on your last vacation, how your day looked like, what you care about in the moment. And those are the words that were most strongly correlated with the personality trait of extroversion. So extroverts are those people who are more outgoing, they're excited about like these social situations, they crave stimulation, and you see this reflected in the word cloud, right? So you see people talking about parties, going out, weekends, amazing, so they're having a great time out there with friends. If you contrast that, and for me the comparison is always the interesting part, if you contrast that to people who are much more reserved, inward-looking, introspective, you see a very different picture, right? So people who are more introverted, they talk about internet, computers, reading. Those are all activities that you don't need other people for, right? So you can happily sit at home, read a book without having other people around you. What we know is that these off-the-shelf generative AI models, and what I mean by that is just a standard version of something like a ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, they can make similar predictions about people without ever having been explicitly trained to do so. So if I take your social media data, I take your Google searches, again, I take some of the credit card spending, and I just pop it into ChatGPT and ask it, hey, look, here are the social media posts of person X. What kind of personality do you think person X has? Or I can make it even interactive and have like this conversation with a chatbot where I'm not necessarily telling the chatbot to gauge your personality, but I tell it, have a free-flowing conversation with a person on the other side. They're actually incredibly good at making the same inferences about, again, something like your personality, your values, mental health, and so on. And now anyone can do it, right? It could be a 15-year-old kid in the basement of their parents' home scraping a bunch of data off the internet, running it through ChatGPT, and getting insights into psychology of millions of people. And the reason for why these large language models can do that is because they've read the entire internet, right? They understand how we kind of think about psychology, how we act, and how we express these psychological traits. Perhaps not surprising that generative AI now can do an incredible job at not just predicting someone's personality from their data, but also generating content that matches these personality traits, right? Thinking back to the beauty retailer, we were limited by manpower. If we had had like a creative team of 1,000 people, we would have probably customized more than just the one ad on Facebook, but that was just not feasible. Now, if you, and this is something that I just did this morning, if you ask, again, ChatGPT, everybody has access to it, write me a short ad for an iPhone that speaks to a person who scores high on the personality traits of openness and extroversion. You don't even have to tell the model what you mean by extroversion and openness because it knows, right? So, and on the fly, it actually creates a pretty remarkable ad that captures this idea that people want to be connected, want to seek stimulation, but also are interested in different aspects and have like these aesthetic preferences. Now, you can obviously take it a step further. So the next thing I did was to say, okay, based on this ad, can you also write me a prompt for your your colleague DALL-E, which is the image generation tool of OpenAI that goes with this ad. So write me a description that I can use to then now generate an image that works with this ad that you just created. Again, you kind of tell it that, it generates a description in essentially no time, really understanding of like what would extroverts, what would someone who's extroverted and open-minded want to see, and this is the image that came out. Not perfect, right? So this is the first thing that I tried, so you see that the people here have a little bit of like spooky faces, but it certainly captured the vibe, right? There's like something stimulating, it's exciting, has saturated colors. So you can imagine that you could essentially on the fly generate an entire website for a person based on your understanding of who that person is and what they might want to see in order to get engaged. But if someone can just tap into my motivations and change the way that I think and feel about the world and potentially behave in the world, now that kind of gradually chips away from my ability to have agency and self-determination in the way that I design my life. But I do believe, and again, there's a whole chapter on this in the book, and we've done a lot of research over the years in this space, that there's a lot of opportunity to the same way that my neighbors were actually, again, able to offer this advice that was helpful because they understood where I was coming from, where I wanted to be. And I think we can do a lot of this in the context of psychological targeting in the digital space as well. So some of the stuff, and this is just a very brief summary of some of the work that we've done and been doing in the lab for the last 10, 15 years again, is I almost think of it as the flip side. So if I manage to get women, for example, to spend more on beauty products, could I also use the same strategy, the same mechanism to help people save, right? So we're using exactly the same technology to accomplish two opposite goals. And this is a project that we did with a fintech company that was trying to help very low income families to save more. So those were all individuals or families with less than $100 in saving. And you can imagine this is a extremely dire situation to be in, right? If you have less than $100 in savings, all that needs to happen is your car breaks down, you're no longer able to go to work, you can't take it to the shop because you don't have the money, you might lose your job, and so on and so forth. So it's extremely hard for these people to save. And what we did here is same principle, say, if we understand your psychology, could we actually encourage you to save money with messages that resonate with you? So if you're someone who is really agreeable, and again, someone who cares about their social relationships, cares about other people more than they care about money, I'm not necessarily going to motivate you to put an extra dollar in the bank account just by saying, well, you should be accumulating savings and that's a way of getting ahead in life. What helps you much more is if I can say, well, saving money today is actually helping you make sure that your loved ones are protected right now and in the future. So again, it's just trying to help people understand why is saving relevant to them and how does it fit into their own lives and motivation. So similar to the beauty retailer, we actually managed to kind of increase the number of people who hit their saving goals by about 50-60%. So you see these almost like symmetrical effects no matter whether you're trying to get people to spend more or to save more.